Finally, I'm here to return to the Final Fantasy series. I know it's been almost an entire year since my video on Final Fantasy 13, link in the description as always. But there have been more than a few reasons as to why that was. First, money. I didn't have a job, so buying a new game every month or so wasn't really an option for me at the time. Two, I wasn't having fun, if that wasn't clear. I didn't like the first or 13th game very much, so I wasn't exactly excited going into Final Fantasy III, especially after the horror stories I heard about the Crystal Tower and just the game as a whole. Three, general unhappiness. I wasn't really in the mood to be productive. I was very much not fond of my last apartment, so I'm sure you can imagine why I was generally just in a bad mood. Four, school. I got busy last semester, which is when I was going to pick this up again. I'm still busy, but not as much. And that's also why I ended up canceling those Avatar videos I was doing, which I still might return to, but you know, I have to prioritize something I started longer ago. So, and number five was the Pixel remaster that came out, which is the version I'll be looking at for this video. I started playing the 3D version. I got to the Gnome Village, I think twice I started playing, and that's about where I got to both times. And I just wasn't having fun with it at all. And I didn't want to... I would rather cancel a series of videos than not finish a version of the game, or an installment in the series, rather, like I did with 13. I still feel really bad about not finishing 13. Who knows, maybe someday I'll go back and I'll finish that and maybe remake that video, but I didn't want to do that again, and I would rather cancel the series than admit that I didn't finish a game in the series and try to make a fair review. So I saw that the Pixel remasters were coming out, and I decided I'll wait for those to come out, and that'll be a good reason for me to go into the other Pixel editions of the series, like Final Fantasy 2, 4, 5, and 6. So I'll just wait for the remasters to come out, and then we'll see. But long-winded story to basically tell you, here we are. We're finally jumping into Final Fantasy 3. So with that being said, let's take a look at what we have here. So the story of Final Fantasy III starts with our four onion kids falling down into a cave. While they're trying to get out, they stumble across the wind crystal, which tells them that they're the four warriors of light, and sends them out to find the other crystals and restore peace and order to the world. So yeah, the story is very familiar to anyone who has played Final Fantasy 1. And I'll admit, at first I was a little disappointed. It felt like we were just going to retread the first game again. And that kind of is the case, but it also kind of isn't. The writing in 3 is just so much smarter. And I think a large portion of that comes down to the fact that there are actual characters in this game. They're not anything crazy, mind you, and a lot of them are pretty one-note. But in comparison to the first game, it's not even a close race. On top of that, the writing is just so much better, like I said. For starters, the leader of the party has dialogue and opinions about what's happening. They ask questions, they express joy and sadness when appropriate. I realize saying this out loud that that's pretty surface level, but again, in comparison to the first game, leaps and bounds. I think another thing that elevates this game for me is the ever-present sense of progression pushing you forward. The player is always itching, at least I was, to see what was next, what this town holds, or what's over this mountain. I actually did a lot of the side content in this game. I didn't really need to, in terms of a grinding standpoint, but I wanted to. I was just curious to see what was there. So far, that hasn't been the case with this series, and I understand that 13 was very linear, but there was side activity there. And what side activities I did do was never out of curiosity, but more so out of a sense of completion, which can be good or bad depending on your perspective. But I was just generally delighted to see that this game held my interest not only through its main content, but through its optional content as well. So in terms of gameplay, I can sum it up pretty easily with the following question. Did you enjoy the gameplay in Final Fantasy I? If the answer is yes, then you're going to like this game too. Fundamentally, the gameplay isn't really any different. You take your 4 party members, give them a class, and then use each member at their highest potential to win any battle you stumble across. There is one small, almost entirely negligible change to the core gameplay though, the job system. And I say it's negligible because more often than not, you're going to be sticking to one job for most of the game. Slight variations and specialties here and there, but for the most part, you're going to have your main 4 jobs that are pretty consistent. But regardless, the job system, whenever you're out of battle, you can change a party member's class to another class. You can do this at any point, as long as you're out of combat. And this offers a lot of versatility and replayability in terms of how you craft your party. You can make your party be whatever kind of build you want. Full melee? Sure, why not? It works for most of the game. And for most of the game, you can progress using whatever party comp you like. But there are points in the game when you are forced to have at least one job in your party. Just as an example, when you're fighting Garuda, you basically have to have 2 Dragoons in your party, or have 2 white mages casting wind magic. If you don't do that, probably not going to go well for you. Or when you're in the Water Temple, or the Temple of Time maybe, you more or less need a thief to get behind the locked doors, to find extra goodies and stuff. It's optional content, but I imagine if you're in the dungeon, you kind of want to explore every path possible. Now I know before the comments show up, I know there are magic key items that you can nab, but unless I just got really unlucky, these drops are stupidly rare, and it's just more reliable to have someone switch to a thief just to get through the door, and then immediately switch them back to their old job. Like, it works, but it kills any sense of pacing the dungeon has. Anyways, you have your party built, and you're off to go find the crystals and restore the world to peace. Now, these first few hours were essential to setting my overall mood. It was looking good. I had a clear objective, a location where I confidently knew progression would be, and then my first battle started. And in this moment, something happened. Something I did not expect in any way from any of the NES-era Final Fantasy games. It was a curious sensation I had not yet felt during my time with the franchise. In fact, it was a feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time. This game is fun. It's really fun. And that surprised me, especially with how I opened the gameplay portion of this video, comparing it to Final Fantasy I. I don't really know why I like the gameplay in this version when I didn't in Final Fantasy I, but I think there's a couple reasons as to why. For starters, I think the switch from mana points to spell slots is a tremendous help. I know the original release of Final Fantasy I used spell slots, but that's not the version I played. I played the PSP remaster. I couldn't tell you why I like this change. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I can concretely see how many more times I can cast a spell of a certain level, rather than just a vague guess at how many more times I can cast a spell. But it's a change I like nonetheless. Second, the boss battles are still phenomenal. They're still the best part of this franchise, 13 notwithstanding. But they're a perfect challenge. Doing an appropriate amount of damage to keep the player engaged while not feeling like bullet sponges. Even Cloud of Darkness, the final boss that I heard so much woe about, who really only has one move, for me at least, was a thrilling encounter. Now, it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There was a really strange difficulty spike at the Temple of Time, and the Earth Cave was just as terrible. Mostly due to a forced job change. They had you basically all but required to pick a Dark Knight for your party, and it's like, well, no, I kind of wanted a Dragoon and not a Dark Knight for this playthrough, but okay. The forced class changes are the biggest detriment on this game, and it was the worst, in my opinion, at the Earth Cave. But other than that, those moments, it was a pretty comfortable journey, challenging when it needed to be, but relaxed as well. Back attacks, ambushes, and preemptive strikes are back. Maybe back attacks weren't in the first game. I don't really remember. And these are still pretty lame to me. I still have no idea what triggers these, if it's just completely random or if there's something I'm doing wrong that triggers these. And they happen so rarely that they're more annoying than interesting. If it's a back attack or an ambush, more often than not, one of my party members is going to go down during the fight, even if it's a regular enemy on the field. In fact, it can only be a regular enemy on the field, but you get my point. So any experience that would have been gained from that fight is lost. And I'm not super comfortable with wasting a turn on using a Phoenix down unless I have to. And if it's a preemptive strike, I'm just going to flee the battle, chances are anyways, just so I can continue progressing. I still don't love random encounters, but they're not as obnoxious here, I felt, as they were in the first game. So I'd prefer if these preemptive strikes, ambushes, back attacks, if they were just deleted. They aren't fun, and they don't really add anything new to the gameplay loop. At the end of the day, the game is just fun. I can't really say much more than that. I thoroughly enjoyed myself from beginning to end. Of course, there were moments when that wasn't the case, but on the whole, the game was enjoyable for me. I do apologize for the relative shortness of this video, but there's only so many ways I can say that it was a fun game and that I enjoyed myself. This isn't, The Last of Us 2, right? That has me contemplating my own stances on violence and stuff like that, right? And vengeance, that it's not that kind of game. This isn't a thinking man's game per se. It's just fun, and that's not a bad thing. It's just there's only so many ways for a game like this that I can say that it was fun. I can only say that so many times before I'm repeating myself. Ultimately, the story was pretty bare bones and a little disappointing. But at the end of the game, when all of my previous companions came back to help out, I didn't care. I was having so much fun, and I was just excited to fight the final boss, and I was happy to see my incredibly boring one-note friends. If you do decide to play this game, I do recommend picking up the Pixel Remaster. You can save scum the Crystal Tower, or Palace, or whatever the fuck it's called, which will make your endgame enjoyment infinitely higher than if you played the NES original. I'm pretty sure the 3D version has that option to save scum, and it is an also viable choice, but I personally found it to be very slow and significantly less enjoyable than the Pixel remake, which is curious because there's a notable attempt to make the story more interesting, but it's still the same story at the end of the day, and it isn't that much different. In the end, I clocked around 16 hours, which is about what I expected for an NES-era RPG. It's about on par with what the first Final Fantasy game was in terms of length. It's a little shorter, but that might have just been because I generally knew what I was doing more so this time. It's interesting because HowLongToBeat.com says it's going to take 19 hours, which I don't know where they're getting those extra hours from, but sure, I guess. Anyways, let's take a look at the next game in the series I'll be taking a look at. For once, I'm actually excited to play the next game in the series, which is it's a first for the series, but I'm looking forward to see what's next. So we have our wheel here. I have every game in here, every mainline game. We have 2 through 12, excluding 3, obviously. We have 13, 2, 14, and 15. I'm looking forward to kind of play everything on this list. I'm curious to see what's next. Privately, maybe not. I guess not privately anymore, but I'm hoping for a PS1, PS2 era. Because we did 2 pixel games, we did a modern game. I'm curious to see what kind of what a lot of people consider to be the golden age of Final Fantasy. Curious to see what that looks like. Though from what I understand, that kind of ends around Final Fantasy 11. That's when I stop hearing kind of consistent. 14 notwithstanding, because I hear a lot about 14, especially recently. But yeah, let's go ahead and give this a spin. I'd be okay with anything on the list, but yeah, I am hoping for maybe one of the PS2 PS1 era games, just to try something new, try something different. But again, I'd be okay with anything on here. Yeah, let's go ahead and give this a spin. I'm excited. Least excited for I think 2, but anything else would be good. Oh man. Okay. I think it's probably a good thing that I'm doing this one before 14, because this is one of the MMOs. This is going to take me some time to do. I might not play all of it. It is an MMO. Those are kind of like never-ending games. I'm also in the midst of my Old Republic Star Wars run as well. So in terms of MMOs, my plate's kind of full. But yeah, I'm excited to go into this. I'm excited to see what it has to offer. So yeah, but other than that, this should take a little bit. Hopefully not too long, but we'll see. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.